To today's video. Today is Monday, January 1st, 2024. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm so excited to get into this presidential election year, which just so happens to coincide alongside many important congressional elections, governor elections, and everything else that's on the ballot this coming November. Now, I switched over my audio back to my original audio. Thank you for the feedback in the last video. I now have a new piece of feedback that I'm actually asking for you guys to give me. My channel just underwent a rebrand. I don't know if any of you noticed, but the logo should have changed on your screen and should have populated on the YouTube side. I also just uploaded new channel art, so let me know what you guys think of it. It sort of is in line with the new thumbnail theme that I've been sticking with for the past couple of months, so I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on it. Do you want me to switch back to the old logo? Do you like this one? Whatever it might be, I just wanted to switch things up ahead of this upcoming election, but of course, if it isn't good for you in terms of viewing pleasure or just generally speaking branding for my channel, please let me know. I am 100% open to hearing all of your thoughts, and I really appreciate all of the comments that I got on my last video about the quality of my microphone. So here I am switching back to the original audio per many of your guys' request. Now, today's video is the first that we are doing of this multi-part series where we are going to be looking at the state of the 2024 Senate elections as of today, January 1st, 2024. If you've been with me throughout previous election cycles, you know that since 2018, I have done monthly updates on the status of Senate elections, House elections, governor elections, and presidential elections in the right years. So in 2018, every single month I did a video, and then right around September and October, I did them every 2 weeks, updates on the current state of the races across a bunch of different Senate elections. And that was helpful in tracking how the races shaped up to be over time. In this video, of course, we're looking at 2024, and we will make one in February, then March, then April, and so on and so forth. So I'm excited to officially kick off the start of this series for the 2024 election cycle for our Senate elections. And so, with that being said, let's start characterizing all of the states that we know are going to be safe red and safe blue, so we can spend more time talking about the substance and what actually matters when it comes down to these races. So Democrats start off with around 40 seats across the country that we can classify to be absolutely Democratic victories, no matter what we like to call safe Democratic seats. I will actually include just two more safe Democratic seats in a moment, but I do want to say for right now, these are the states that we generally declare to be safe for either side of the aisle, regardless of what year it might be, regardless of what election it might be, because that's how partisan they are. That means states like California go blue and states like Wyoming go red, and it doesn't really matter who's at the top of the ticket, presidential or not, because they are going to be the states that are very lopsided in favor of one political party for a variety of different reasons. Now, we are starting to characterize all the states that Republicans currently have a very solid grip on. States like Wyoming, Nebraska. This little circle here means there is a special election going on due to a retirement. I believe Pete Ricketts is now going to be the president of the University of Florida, if I'm getting that correctly. Maybe he's UNL. I don't know. He probably is in Nebraska. Maybe I just threw in Florida, or maybe it was Ben Sass. I don't know exactly where this retirement is coming from. I probably should know. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and check because I don't like being ill-informed on this, but I remember there was a reason for Pete Ricketts. Okay, he was leaving Congress here, or leaving the Senate. Let's see. So he was appointed. Pete Ricketts was appointed because he's the governor right now, but he is running for re-election. Why is it? Ben Sass became president of the University of Florida. Sorry to detract because I want to talk about the substance here. I just remember there was a special election for a reason, and I was thinking there was another woman in the delegation there for the Senate. Regardless, Nebraska is a special election. It's safe red. No one really cares about it because we know how it's going to go. Nobody's really investing in money there, but there actually is an interesting independent candidate running in Nebraska. I don't think they're going to get that much closer than the Democratic Party, but they certainly will get closer, and we'll see how close that actually is. Regardless, the Republicans are going to easily lock down that state, and thus it adds to their overall total. So we're around 47 seats for Republicans. Unfortunately for the Democratic Party, their safe seats doesn't just end here. The Republican Party has a very, very strong grip on many of the states that we have up in 2024, including some with Democratic incumbents. States like Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia. You might know them for being states that Donald Trump won in the 2020 election. West Virginia went in by 30 points. Ohio, actually 40 points nearly in 2020. Ohio went by 8. Montana went by around 16. Yet, Democrats are actually incumbents in all three of these seats. The bad news for Democrats is that Joe Manchin, the incumbent Democratic senator from West Virginia, announced that he will not be running for re-election. He's going to leave the United States Senate, and thus West Virginia automatically is a safe red seat. I just needed to talk about it briefly because it is a state that we do have a lot of people looking towards to see maybe there will be some random Democrat who enters into the race who can make this race electable. Absolutely not. Jim Justice easily has this locked down, and I would honestly characterize it the same way, even if Joe Manchin was on the ballot. Democrats, on the other hand, do have their fair share of states that we can characterize as safe blue. States like Minnesota, where Amy Klobuchar, a very widely respected and adored candidate from the Democratic Party, who has won consistently across the state for year after year after year, election after election after election. Minnesota goes blue. New Mexico also goes blue. Republicans haven't had much luck here when it comes down to congressional elections, whether on the House level or the Senate level. The entire delegation is Democrats. And the Senate level here, too, you will find that the Democratic Party is on track to do very well in 2024, especially if the numbers are anywhere similar to where they were back in 2020, meaning a double-digit Democratic victory. New Mexico seems to be a little bit more out of reach for the Republican Party, especially this year, than most. So New Mexico, Minnesota, states that I would say the Democratic Party has on lockdown. I would also argue that Democrats are probably going to win in Virginia by a safe margin. Tim Kaine just so happens to be one of the more popular Democratic representatives in terms of the congressional representatives from Virginia. He is a senator. He's very well adored statewide. He helped Hillary Clinton a lot in this state in 2016. He also had a very impressive victory back in 2018, which we don't often talk about, but Virginia, many Republicans were saying, look at it, it's going to be a sleeper. It wasn't. In fact, the Republicans were the ones who were likely sleeping. They lost this race by 16 points. So Virginia, very much a state that I think the Democrats have on lockdown in 2024. Biden won it by 10 points. Tim Kaine absolutely will outrun the president, even if Biden's winning it by 6 because of how close the presidential election is. Tim Kaine's absolutely outrunning the president. Virginia, not really in consideration here. But in terms of the remaining states, we actually have about 9 states that aren't going to be decided by 15 points or more. 9 states that will be very important in determining the outcome of this upcoming Congress. And so Republicans at starting value begin with 48 seats to the Democratic Party's 43. And this is why I've been saying for a while that the map here is very lopsided in favor of the GOP, because quite frankly, it is. Republicans don't need to do much defending. If Trump wins the presidency, they need 2 out of the 9 here to win control of the Senate. If Trump loses the presidency, they just need 3. So you're talking about a 33% win rate, or maybe around a 27% win rate for this to be also something that gets them the majority. Think about how easy that is, right? If that was what the case was for Democrats, it would be a no-brainer. Because in 2022, when they ran for the Senate, when they were running and playing defense, they needed to run the map, right? They needed to win across numerous battleground states, and they lost maybe 2, Wisconsin and North Carolina, but won everywhere else. And that was good news for Democrats, but it required a lot. It required victories all across the board, across that entire toss-up column. That is not the case for Republicans in 2024, because also it isn't just about winning states that, they are in the entire toss-up column. That's not the case, right? Where we are right now on this map is that Republicans absolutely have the advantage, not just because of the safe states, but also because of the likely states. Likely states are states that we characterize based off of a number of different factors, but we generally know how they're going to go. Fundraising numbers, past electoral history, current candidate quality, all these things come into consideration in our predetermined outcome that these states are likely blue or likely red. Meaning maybe in a wave year, they could sway to the other side of the aisle than what they traditionally vote for. But in this one, we're pretty much locking in on who we expect to win. That means states like Florida are probably going to go red regardless of who's running on the Democratic side. In addition to that too, Florida, although a closer state than usual, has shown in the last election cycle that it has voted for Republicans and can vote for Republicans by anywhere from 16 to 20 points statewide. And so Florida, absolutely, I could see someone like Rick Scott doing very well, considering he's not unpopular and has already won numerous statewide elections in Florida. And given that it's a much more Republican state than it was even 4 years ago, I would say it's a likely red state. I would also say that on the flip side, Democrats have their own likely states as well. Now, I don't necessarily think it's going to be really much of a big deal. But right now, Wisconsin, the Republican Party simply cannot field a candidate to save their lives. As of today, this is where Wisconsin stands. The GOP does not stand a chance with their current slate of candidates. Even if they bring in and usher in the former Democratic sheriff, I believe from Milwaukee, I don't imagine he would do quite well in the general election. Tammy Baldwin is a liked candidate, and we've seen matchups where she has faced off against a candidate like Leah Vukmir, who doesn't come to this table with a strong electoral presence, a strong backing from the national GOP, you know what happens? Democrats end up winning in the state of Wisconsin. And so I think that could very well be the case, especially today, considering I'm not really impressed by the current slate of candidates that the GOP has brought up for the state of Wisconsin. So now we're down to around 7 toss-ups. I will say Texas, I've gone back and forth on as to whether or not I would call it a likely red state. Right now, I'm a bit iffy because I think Ted Cruz is just so dislikable that maybe if he retires, it would be different, but he's so dislikable that Texas is probably going to be closer than most people expect given the circumstances of the year. So let's move down to these remaining 7 states and talk about them from the Republican perspective, because the reason for that is you look at the map here and you see that Republicans are at 49 seats. Again, 1 if Trump wins, 2 if he doesn't. There are 7 in total. So many, many opportunities, ones that I would say are arguably very important. And so looking at our map here, this is what I like to call my Republican candidate quality tracker. Essentially looking at some of these states, these battleground states in specific, we've put together a list of all the candidates. You can look at it on the Wikipedia, you can look at it on Ballotpedia, whatever you want to go, but it's all up to date. And you find that, generally speaking, the Republican Party doesn't exactly have their strongest lineup for 2024. There are certainly some impressive areas and some impressive recruits and some impressive areas that I think the GOP has been able to do quite well in. In Florida, they got Rick Scott to come back. He seems to love his position in the United States Senate. He's actually recently taken on a role no longer in that position, but he was chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. You take a look at West Virginia, they got the governor to decide to run there, Jim Justice, who just around 8 years ago was actually a registered Democrat when he won re-election to the governorship. So West Virginia now has a Republican pickup easily. Florida easily has a very strong Republican delegation. But when it comes down to some of the states where they really need strong candidates, we just characterize Minnesota as safe blue. They don't have one. Characterize Wisconsin as a likely blue state. They don't have one, right? And so that's where you start to see this tilt column come into effect. Republicans there really don't have strong candidates. But around the middle, we have the remaining states. On the stronger side, we have Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Nevada, and Montana. Now, Michigan and Pennsylvania, both of these are contingent on primary victories, but the strongest candidate, Mike Rogers in Michigan, Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania, are probably going to win. So I'd keep those in the likely column when it comes down to candidate quality, meaning they're pretty strong candidates, but they're not the strongest the Republicans could have put up. Mike Rogers, for context, is a former U.S. representative, not a big name in the state of Michigan, but boring enough that he could win. Pennsylvania, Dave McCormick is better than Dr. Oz was, and probably the best out of the current crop that exists, but the fact that the crop doesn't have a strong candidate is telling in itself and telling for their chances in the general election. Nevada and Montana are also contingent on primary, as all of these races are, but much more heavily. In Nevada, there could be a situation in which somebody like Sam Brown, like Jim Merchant, ends up winning the nomination and ends up losing the general election significantly more because they are a weak nominee. In Montana, Matt Rosendale, the incumbent representative who actually lost this exact Senate seat 6 years ago, is also running for the race against Tim Sheehy, who is just known as a car dealer. And so there is a very interesting primary going on both in Nevada and Montana that if the worst candidate wins, I could see this reduced down to being lean red or potentially even tilt red, given that some of these candidates have already lost this election in past elections, right? So Montana, Nevada, Michigan, Pennsylvania, for right now, I would say the Republican Party sure has a strong candidate in some scenarios, but not in all. But on the weaker side of things, you take a look, that's not the right map. On the weaker side of things, you have Arizona and Texas, Ohio, and Virginia. Now, Virginia we already know is going to go blue. Let's not waste time talking about that. Arizona and Texas and Ohio, though, are a bit trickier. Ted Cruz, like I said, is a lackluster candidate. He is not the strong incumbent that Republicans need him to be. In 2018, he almost lost the Senate seat when 6 years prior, he had won the Senate seat by 16 points. So imagine the Republican Party's concern and shock when they see that the map reduced from Cruz plus 16 to Cruz plus 2.8 against a no-name congressman across the state of Texas. And so knowing that, Ted Cruz is certainly not the strong electoral Republican that they need him to be. In Arizona, though, it's even worse. In Arizona, that's where you have Carrie Lake. You might remember her because she ran for governor back in 2022 and lost and refused to concede the election and has continued down this pathway of electoral denialism, continued down this pathway of extremism that has turned off Arizona voters once and could very well do it again. And not only to top this all off, but Arizona and Texas, you see here that Donald Trump is in full support of both of these candidates. In another state where Donald Trump is also in full support of this weak candidate who is now the front runner, you have Bernie Moreno, who also just so happens to be, actually, I think Tim Sheehy is not a car dealer. He is a Army veteran, but in Ohio, I think he's actually a former Navy SEAL. In Ohio, that's where the car dealer came in. Sorry, I mixed up my Republican candidates here. In Ohio, Bernie Moreno is probably the most extreme candidate that Republicans could have potentially nominated. We'll see how that goes. But Donald Trump has endorsed him. And he's not in a strong position to win this election against Sherrod Brown, who arguably is a strong Democrat. And so you see that the Republican Party is starting to fall apart in some of these very, very important states. Depending on how primaries go, they could also fall apart in some very, very important states. Matt Rosendale, who has not announced that he's running for Senate, you can take a look at this article here from the Flathead Beacon, seems to suggest that he's going to. He even mentions that the filing for running for Senate doesn't even open until January 11th. Who knows that type of date if you're not even deciding to do it? It's very interesting. He's probably going to run. And so looking at these remaining 7 states, I could actually imagine a reality in which Republicans lose all of them, but it's going to be very hard to see that happening. I think Republicans still very much have a very, very built-in advantage because they're running alongside the same presidential ballot that will likely be similar to the one in 2020. The only difference here is that Trump might do better or Biden might do better, but only marginally, if you ask me. So for right now, what we're going to start off with is characterizing the states that we, moving from the West Coast to the East Coast, but talking about them pretty high level because we know enough about the Republicans now. It's more about the Democrats. So in the state of Nevada, even if Republicans do have a strong enough candidate, I still think this state at a default is a blue state. We've seen it historically go blue no matter what the Republicans throw at it when it comes down to nationalized elections. That means Senate, House, and presidential. Democrats do quite well there. Jackie Rosen is also a strong candidate. She defeated Jen Heller, a Republican incumbent, by 5 points in her first election. So Nevada, I could see going blue regardless of who the Republican nominee is going to be, but one would certainly make it easier than another. In the state of Arizona, I'd say that Democrats are the narrow favorites right now. I do believe that it's going to be close, especially if Kyrsten Sinema introduces herself into the race. But what we have seen in consistent polling data and fundraising data, and in terms of electoral history for both the House races, the Senate race from 2018, the governor's race from 2022, the Senate race from 2022, all of that information compiled tells us that Ruben Gallego would probably still edge out a victory even if Kyrsten Sinema was in the race. It would be more difficult, but I think the margin would be roughly the same, and that he still defeats Carrie Lake by a narrow margin, but still a Democratic victory regardless. That brings their number to 46. When it comes down to the state of Montana, I'm a bit iffy, because I think recent data has suggested that Tim Sheehy is on track for victory in that primary. Prior to this, months ago, it was not the case, right? Matt Rosendale was the favorite. If he had decided to announce, he would have been able to win that primary, and that's what the data told us. Now it's telling a different story, largely because we've seen the governor, Greg Gianforte, endorse Tim Sheehy. The other senator, Steve Daines, endorsed Tim Sheehy. Many of the Republicans nationally, too, Marco Rubio, Mitch McConnell's PAC, etc., all are backing Tim Sheehy because they know he's the more electable candidate because only one of them has ran and lost against this exact incumbent. And with that being said, I think Jon Tester could reasonably lose the state of Montana. When it comes down to Texas, too, I think also Republicans are on track for victory there. I think that it's a really hard swallow for Democrats that they're probably going to lose the Senate elections, but that's the current state of the race. Although Ted Cruz is unpopular and Colin Allred is raising a lot of money, and there are other Democrats out there who also are raising a lot of money, Texas is still a red state. It's also running alongside a presidential margin. It's going to be difficult because Democrats did worse in 2020 than they did in 2018. That's because the race was so nationalized and Texas was at the center of it all. And so I think Texas in 2024 will very much be back at the center of many strategies and targets for both sides of the aisle, but Republicans, at the bare minimum, are going to be able to win with Ted Cruz. Montana, too, I think Tim Sheehy will win that nomination and defeat Jon Tester by a very narrow margin. But again, remember that the national margin here, the national coattails here for Donald Trump will likely bring him to victory, nothing else. And so I think Montana right now, Texas right now are red states, and that brings Republicans already to 51, which means they win the majority. But their luck sort of runs out. By the time we reach the state of Michigan, the Democrats are still going to win here. I don't imagine that you're going to see Democrats losing the state of Michigan, especially coinciding with the presidential. Traditionally speaking, too, recently at least, Michigan has been voting bluer when it comes down to the pro-choice amendment, when it comes down to the governorship, all the statewide elections, all the state legislative elections. Michigan, I think, is still a blue state at heart, and even if it is very close on the presidential, I could see a reality in which Elisa Slotkin or whoever makes it, Hill Harper, whatever, wins Michigan's Senate primary on the Democratic side. I think they could end up moving to the general election, defeating someone like Mark Rogers. And it actually gets even better if Peter Meyer makes it through, or even James Craig, who I think would be the weakest of them all. So Michigan is a blue state. Moving over to the state of Pennsylvania, I want to talk about this one a little bit more. Bob Casey running for re-election. His name, his family, a political dynasty in the state of Pennsylvania. A very strong one, too. And he has shown that electoral presence and strength in 2018 when he won his Senate race by a whopping 10-point margin, or actually 15-point margin, or 14. And so Pennsylvania is a state that I think Bob Casey could do very, very well in 2024. But at the same time, I think because the candidate isn't Lou Barletta and it's someone like Dave McCormick, it'll be closer. Not as close as maybe the presidential was back in 2020 or even 2016. I still think you're going to see about a 4 to 5 point victory for Bob Casey. Still a victory, one that probably could carry Joe Biden across to the finish line. But Pennsylvania right now I think is a blue state, and that adds to the Democrats at 48. That brings us down to the final state, the state of Ohio. I think Republicans really messed up in this state. I think we saw that Frank LaRose, despite his flaws, would have been a stronger candidate than Bernie Moreno. I think we also saw that practically anyone like Matt Dolan or the rest of the crew could have been a stronger candidate than Bernie Moreno. I think Donald Trump made the wrong choice here. I think this is very similar to 2022 when he chose people like Herschel Walker, when he chose people like Blake Masters, when he chose people like Carrie Lake, when he chose people like Dr. Oz. All across the country, Donald Trump made the wrong choice in 2022. I think he's made some correct choices in 2024 and chosen to stay out of some races as a correct choice for 2024. But this is one where I think he's made a mistake. And I think although Donald Trump will probably win Ohio by 6, 7, 8 points, maybe more, maybe less in 2024, I think Sherrod Brown can still edge out a victory against Bernie Moreno. Pair him up against any other Republican, though, I switch the map. I switch it over to the GOP. But Sherrod Brown is strong. He can win an election when Republicans hand him the victory. And I think that is what is happening now. He needs the worst candidate possible on the GOP side. And by the grace of whoever, he has gotten that with the Truth Social Donald Trump endorsement of Bernie Moreno, something that I think could be truly cataclysmic for the Ohio GOP and their chances at taking the entire delegation in the Senate and flipping it red. Because for right now, I think Sherrod Brown is the favorite in the state of Ohio, bringing the Democrats to a total number of 49. And so that brings our national number, 51 to 49. Republicans flip back control by picking up 2 seats in the United States Senate, West Virginia, and Montana, but Democrats still hold out strong, giving them a very strong opportunity in 2026 at winning back Senate control. But as of right now, the Senate map is very much in favor of the GOP, and I do expect them to win back Senate control in this 51 to 49 advantage. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.